A huge swath of right-wing Twitter just fell for a hoax about COVID-19 vaccines, and it's actually kind of tragic. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show, your home for independent and nonpartisan commentary and analysis on politics, media, internet insanity, and more. And this story kind of has it all, but also comes back to the theme of just trying to be straight with you guys about the facts and about truth, regardless of what team is pushing something or what personal feelings I have about an issue. I'm just a big believer that facts matter, and that misinformation is really harmful, especially when it comes to matters of life and death. And that's where the latest big story on right-wing Twitter it brings us, because essentially, here's the headline from the Wall Street Journal. GOP senators release Fauci texts discussing COVID-19 vaccine risk to pregnant women. Exchange shows Fauci and top health officials debating pros and cons of the shots. So essentially what happened is a pair of Republican senators, Rand Paul and Ron Johnson, released some more messages from Dr. Fauci that show him privately considering some hypothetical concerns about the COVID-19 vaccine for pregnant women. And you can look at that text. He's just considering an issue. He didn't say anything publicly. That's kind of its own conversation and story, whether you think he handled that appropriately or not. But what I want to focus on is clarifying something that has gone super viral from this document release. Here is a viral tweet from News Nation host Katie Pavlich, who is a conservative. This tweet has almost 5 million views and is being very widely circulated. And in this tweet, she attaches a screenshot from one of the documents that Senator Johnson and Paul released, and she writes, "The mandated and doctor-recommended COVID-19 shot for pregnant women was effectively an abortion shot, according to new documents just released by Senators Johnson and Paul." Quote, "The authors claimed a miscarriage rate of 12.6%, but the raw data revealed an 82% miscarriage rate in women vaccinated during the first trimester. This is consistent with the 81% miscarriage rate noted in the Pfizer post-market data. These figures mirror the effects of chemical abortion drugs such as RU486. So this idea from Katie's post that screenshots this statement from the documents that were released, that is just one particular person's testimony. This idea is actually not a new claim. It came out years ago, but it recirculated. And now millions of people actually are under the impression, because of Katie's post and the way these documents were released and the way it was uncritically presented, that the COVID-19 shot, the vaccine, whatever you think of it otherwise, right? And I was never somebody who thought it should have been mandated or mandatory, and certainly not for pregnant women either. They are suggesting, and this narrative spread like crazy on Twitter, that it was actually similar to an abortion shot and caused more than 80% of pregnant mothers who received the vaccine in the first trimester to have a miscarriage. That is a wild accusation that, if true, would have resulted in millions of additional miscarriages, which already should have your red flags up, because we don't see that in the population-wide data about miscarriage rates. Anyway, so this idea that a COVID vaccine in the first trimester was associated with an 82% rate and therefore was like an abortion shot, this spread like wildfire. And this led people to claim that it was now proven that the shot caused miscarriages, and that therefore Dr. Fauci had murdered people's babies, essentially. So I'm going to read you a handful of popular tweets spread across right-wing Twitter last night while this was all going down. The influencer Nick Sorter tweeted, "Holy crap, Dr. Fauci was covering up data showing a miscarriage rate of over 80% in pregnant women who received mRNA COVID vaccines in their first trimester. It was effectively an abortion shot. This is murder." Now, we're going to go through the main claims here, but I'll just point out that this data wasn't covered up. The data that they're talking about was all published and analyzed in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2021. So there was no cover-up. Anyway, at least about this. There were plenty of other things that were covered up, just not this particular data set. Anyway, Nurse Kate, who I believe is the wife of MAGA influencer Benny Johnson, tweeted, Fauci and the Surgeon General knew they were harming and killing babies. They knew, and they forced women to take something that would harm their babies. They knew it's murder. Similarly, the Blaze host, Liz Wheeler, shared this same screenshot and said, in case you hear liars still lying, here's the evidence the COVID jab caused miscarriages, an 82% miscarriage rate, the same as the abortion pill. And then she's just sharing this same screenshot from the documents released by Ron Johnson and Rand Paul that is summarizing this data that we're going to look at. And you will see is analyzing this data incorrectly. So it is just a screenshot from testimony released as part of these documents that incorrectly analyzes publicly available data that we can look at and verify. And they're saying it's been proven. Anyway, here's Daily Wire host Isabel Brown. Just so we're clear, this miscarriage rate is statistically equivalent to force feeding millions of pregnant women the abortion pill and hoping it kills their babies. Yet Dr. Fauci, who knew this was happening, won't even answer a single question about it, let alone face the consequences. So these are some pretty serious... Oh, here's one more tweet. Holy crap, from DC Drano, a very popular mega influencer. This tweet has 2 million views. Holy crap, they said the COVID vaccine had a 12.6 miscarriage rate for pregnant women, but it was actually 82%. Fauci and his co-conspirators need to be thrown in jail. Now, this is a strange story for me because I am an OG Dr. Fauci critic. Like, I think he made a lot of terrible decisions, was very dishonest in many ways. And if he hadn't been pardoned by President Biden, I would have been very open to the idea of potentially prosecuting him for lying to Congress when he testified about gain-of-function research, and I believe knowingly misled Congress. But on this is just a complete misunderstanding that has morphed into very severe accusations that are just not true. And we're going to go through this because the data that they're looking at, this 82% number, is calculated in a way that is totally wrong and incorrect. You can only get that number if you make a crazy, crazy calculation that is not remotely scientific or correct. I'm going to read from you and the community note that has been suggested to be attached to Katie Pavlich's original post. Quote, the 82% miscarriage figure uses an invalid denominator. The New England Journal of Medicine study noted it could not calculate miscarriage risk for early exposure participants. That's referring to pregnant women who got the shot in their first trimester because 905 of the 1,224 lacked follow-up data. A later analysis of the same registry found a 14.1% rate within historical norms. So what I want to explain is the only way they didn't have follow-up data for 905 of the women who had received the shot in the first trimester because this original 82% calculation is using the data just after a few months, and most of these women were still pregnant. And so you can only get this rate if you exclude all of those women who also got the shot in the first trimester, and they didn't have follow-up data yet. And then you just look at the ones whose pregnancies had completed, which refers to either a premature birth or a miscarriage. So it's a totally weird distortion that does not tell you anything about what the population of pregnant women who had this shot in their first trimester, what their outcomes were. It's not true that 82% of that population had a miscarriage because you need to also count those 905 who were still pregnant when you made this first calculation, because they also had the shot in the first trimester. You need to see what happened with them. And when you do that, when they came back and later finished the analysis, it was a 14.1% rate of miscarriage, which is tragically within the norm of what you would expect in a population that hadn't had the shot. So this whole thing is just a complete misunderstanding, but it's gone mega viral. And here's how I can prove to you that this is not a real claim. Right? Even if you are somebody who's skeptical of these vaccines and doesn't think they should have been given to pregnant women, that's fine. But this idea that they cause miscarriages isn't true. And here's how one good reason, one red flag. There's a journalist named Alex Berenson who used to work for the New York Times, and he is one of the most well-known and famous or infamous, depending on where you're coming from, critics of mRNA vaccines and the COVID-19 vaccines. He thinks they're awful, he thinks they're dangerous, he thinks they're terrible. But even he said that this viral claim is wrong and that there is no data supporting this idea. I want to read you his post responding to Katie's original super viral tweet. He writes, "This is fiction. If it were true, the birth rate in mRNA countries would have dropped to near zero in 2021 and 2022. Please don't lie about this. It's too important. I say this as the most serious critic of the mRNAs since 2021. In a follow-up tweet, he said, "Huge national level databases show no impact on miscarriages or newborn health. I looked hard. It's not there." So you have one of the biggest critics of these vaccines who is very familiar with the data, whether you agree with his criticisms of them or not, saying like, guys, this isn't correct. Stop sharing this. This is wrong. I think that's telling. It's also very telling that the CDC, which is run by RFK Jr., today, under the Trump administration, still says on its website, quote, "More than 1 million pregnant women around the world have received an mRNA COVID vaccine before and during pregnancy. Studies have shown no increased risk for complications like miscarriage, preterm delivery, stillbirth, or birth defects." So you would think if this risk was there and real, then the vaccine skeptics currently running the CDC and HHS would have changed the CDC's statements on this. They have not. And again, this data that they're talking about, the 82%, has been out for years. It's not actually new. It's just been recirculated with the release of these documents. It's not new data. So it's not like the equation has suddenly changed. And yet even RFK Jr. hasn't changed this position from the CDC. And what's so strange about this claim is that we literally know it's not true because there's no way that this one data set could have actually found a correct finding that the COVID vaccine caused 82% of pregnant women who received it in the first trimester to miscarry. And then all the population-wide analysis, all the other studies and data about this just observed no difference. Unless those are all fake, they're all just totally rigged. And this one person who the actual authors of that New England Journal of Medicine study don't think their data proves an indication of a safety issue in terms of miscarriages. But the one person who reinterpreted it incorrectly, in my view, and in the view of many, that is testifying in these documents that Ron Johnson and Rand Paul have recirculated and released, yeah, that's somehow true, but yet every other analysis doesn't pick this up. That makes no sense. It absolutely makes no sense. So, for example, here's a meta-analysis that was published in the Journal of Human Reproduction in 2023, The Risk of Miscarriage Following COVID-19 Vaccination, a systematic review and meta-analysis. They looked at 21 studies, including 5 randomized trials and 16 observational studies that covered a total of 149,000 women. Quote, "The pooled rate of miscarriage among women who received a COVID vaccine was 9%, compared to those who received a placebo or no vaccination. Women who received a COVID-19 vaccine did not have a higher risk of miscarriage." So look, it's just literally impossible that this 82% figure that's just been spreading like wildfire across right-wing Twitter over the last, 48 hours could be real or correct. Because we would have seen it. Millions and millions of pregnant women took these vaccines in the first trimester. And if 82% of them had miscarried, that would show up, one, that would have been hugely noticeable at the time, and two, that would show up as a huge dip in the data on birth rates and on miscarriage rates and other things that doesn't exist in the actual data. So it is literally impossible that this figure is real or correct. So everyone is basically sharing an out of context, incorrect analysis of someone else's data to suggest that 82% of women who received the COVID vaccine had a miscarriage, and therefore they're wildly claiming that they were forced to take an abortion shot, which would be a crime against humanity. But that's absolutely not true or real. I mean, if this had actually happened, it would show up in the population-wide data and across the world. but the global analysis of this data doesn't find this effect. And the whole statistical misinterpretation that everybody is sharing is based on a wrong calculation with incorrect denominator, and the actual correct number when you calculate it is in line with a normal population. But millions of people are just sharing this incredulously. People are now saying it's been proven that the COVID shot causes miscarriages. And again, I'm a huge critic of Dr. Fauci. I'm a huge critic of a lot of these institutions and the way they handled the pandemic. But this is totally false. Yet millions of people are just spreading this mass hysteria and mass misinformation. And you know who I feel particularly terrible about in this equation is there are now countless thousands, probably, of understandably, of course, heartbroken mothers who lost their babies to miscarriage, who are now feeling like maybe it was because of the COVID shot they took, even though there's no evidence to think that's why or why it happened. But they're being told that, and maybe they're blaming Dr. Fauci, or they're blaming their company that forced them to take the shot, or what have you. And again, they can feel however they want to feel about if they were pressured to take that shot, and maybe they never should have been. I'm totally open to that idea, but they shouldn't be misled about what happened to their baby, because there's no evidence behind this. The statistical claims here are totally false. So it's just a sad, sad display. And I think information or misinformation totally leading people astray, and just the utter lack of statistical literacy among even the pundit and media class on the right at the moment when it comes to some of these questions, because people are just sharing stuff they don't understand. They're not doing any due diligence. They're not asking basic follow-up questions, and they're just pushing mass hysteria and panic that is absolutely not justified by the facts. But other than that, we're doing amazing. I don't know, guys. You'll have to let me know what you think in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. If you aren't yet, do hit the like button. And guys, this is the kind of nuanced and nonpartisan take that I usually lose money for doing, and even lose subscribers sometimes. So if you want to support me in my independent-minded attempt to just call balls and strikes on stuff, the best way to do that is by becoming a channel member here on YouTube. Hit the join button or click the link in the description to sign up to support my work. And with that, guys, we'll leave it there for this one and be back with more real soon.